Please be seated. Jesus says, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." It was the evening of Tuesday, December 25th, 1956, Christmas Day. The Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth was at home with his family and two members of his church. As the pastor of Bethel Baptist Church in Birmingham, Shuttlesworth was a leading figure in the civil rights movement in Alabama. That Christmas evening, Shuttlesworth was preparing a campaign to challenge the city's segregation laws. The Supreme Court had just ruled weeks earlier that bus segregation in Montgomery, Alabama, was unconstitutional. Shuttlesworth was ready to take the fight to Birmingham. At 9:30 p.m. that night, as he lay in bed, a bomb exploded behind his bedroom. Police, firefighters, and neighbors rushed to the scene. The house was virtually destroyed. Some thought their minister had died. And then Shuttlesworth emerged unscathed from the rubble. A police officer came over to the minister, crying. "Reverend, I know these people," the police officer said of the men who had bombed his house. "I didn't think they would go this far. If I were you, I would get out of town. These people are vicious." When Jesus tells Peter that he must go to Jerusalem and endure great suffering and be killed, Peter rebukes him. Peter desperately does not want this to be true. But Jesus makes clear that not only must Jesus himself die on the cross, but anyone who follows him must do the same. In popular usage today, taking up the cross has come to mean having the resilience to endure a difficult trial, to bear the burden without being crushed of the problems that life can bring all of us. But for Jesus, taking up the cross has a more direct meaning. We are to take up the cross so that we might become crucified on it. Of all the different types of capital punishment in the ancient world, crucifixion was regarded by the Romans and the Jews as the worst form of death. They called it the summum supplicium, the ultimate punishment, and it was reserved for slaves and political rebels. Not only was crucifixion extremely painful, but it was shameful. The person dragging that cross through the streets was subject to mockery and scorn by the public. And so when Jesus tells the disciples, and by extension all of us, that we are to take up the cross, he means that we are to risk death, our literal death as martyrs, and the metaphoric death of all of our desires, as well as public disgrace as the cost of following him. How does a person find the courage to do this? The police officer had advised Shuttlesworth, "Reverend, I know these people. If I were you, I'd get out of town. These people are vicious." The day after the bombing, December 26th, the campaign to end bus segregation in Birmingham was supposed to begin. Some of the protest organizers came to Shuttlesworth and begged him to call it off. They were frightened by the bombing and afraid for his life and for their own. "Hell yeah, we're going to ride," Shuttlesworth responded. "Find you any kind of crack you can to hide in if you're scared. But I'm walking downtown after this meeting and getting on the bus. I'm not going to look back to see who's following me. The bombing of his home had the opposite of its intended effect. Rather than scare Shuttlesworth, surviving the bombing had given him a new courage that had steeled his spine. In that frightening moment as the bomb exploded, as he held up his hands to protect his face from the falling debris, Shuttlesworth heard words from Scripture. Underneath you are the everlasting arms. He felt God's protective presence around him. He had fallen into the abyss, and he learned that God was with him even there. Shuttlesworth was transformed. To the police officer who told him to run away, the minister responded, "Officer, you are not me. You see God saving me through all this. So you go back and tell your clan brethren that if God could keep me through all this, I'm here for the duration." Peter's transformation was similar. During the lifetime of Jesus, we see Peter continually fail to show courage. Just talking about Jesus' death frightens him and makes him rebuke Jesus. The thought of Jesus suffering and dying is too much to bear for him. But then, in the depths of those dark days after the crucifixion, when all hope seemed lost, Peter encountered the risen Christ. He knew that even when he was most vulnerable and alone and afraid, Jesus was there and would never leave him. This experience steeled his spine. And from that point on, all the way to his own death in Rome during Nero's persecution, Peter will have the courage to stay faithful to the movement that Jesus started. It is through our encounter with the risen Christ in the darkest and hardest moments of our lives that we learn this truth. Jesus is there with us in the abyss. That is where we discover the strength to pick up our cross and gain the courage to let ourselves be crucified upon it. And when that happens, we are able to do what seems impossible. It was September 15th, 1963, almost exactly 60 years ago today. Fred Shuttlesworth had just returned home from church when his phone rang, and he heard the terrible news. There had been a bombing at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. 4 girls between the ages of 11 and 14, Denise McNair, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robertson, and Addie Mae Collins, had just left their Sunday school class that morning to freshen up in a bathroom located in the church basement. They were getting ready to be ushers at the main service. At 10:25 a.m., a bomb exploded under the back stairwell of the church, which was near the basement bathroom. The 4 girls were killed. One of the men who arrived at the scene was a deacon in the church. He was the grandfather of Denise McNair, one of the victims. And as he lifted up heavy chunks of concrete off his dead granddaughter and carried her body to the ambulance, Deacon M.W. Pippin screamed in rage, "I'd like to blow this whole town up." Can you blame him? The Sunday school lesson the girls learned that morning had been on the love that forgives. But none of us would blame Deacon Pippin if he went to rage and sought vengeance on the killers. If he turned away from the love that forgives toward an unending hate of the murderers. But he didn't. None of the parents or the members of the community did. They did not fall into the deep pit of despair. They did not lose themselves in seeking vengeance. Instead, following Jesus, they picked up a cross of almost unbearable weight, let themselves be crucified upon a cross, experiencing almost unbelievable pain, and discovered even in that darkest and most terrible moment, even in that abyss, Jesus was there. In his eulogy for the victims of the bombing, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. spoke to the bereaved families. Now I say to you in conclusion, life is hard, at times as hard as crucible steel. It has its bleak and difficult moments. Like the ever-flowing waters of the river, life has its moments of drought and its moments of flood. Like the ever-changing cycle of the seasons, life has the soothing warmth of its summers and the piercing chill of its winters. And if one will hold on, you will discover that God walks with you and that God is able to lift you from the fatigue of despair to the buoyancy of hope and transform dark and desolate valleys into sunlit paths of inner peace.